Today we begin the place the world is watching most closely, the Pokrovsk Mirnograd sector in Donetsk. For nearly a year and a half, this front has been ground and symbol at once, a test of tactics, morale and logistics. Over the last 24 hours, Ukraine still holds parts of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, and crucially those garrisons have not been completely encircled. That said, Russian forces have widened their foothold in Pokrovsk and opened a fresh axis towards Mirnograd. The fighting is fluid and bitter. Two pictures matter when you try to understand what's happening on the ground. First, the city-level picture. Russian advance units have taken new ground inside Pokrovsk, including approaches to a river that forms a natural defensive obstacle. Small Russian assault detachments, not mass tank columns, have been infiltrating urban blocks and basements. They can gain positions that are hard to dislodge. And because many of the high-rise buildings have basements and extensive underground space, any Russian foothold there could become a stubborn bridgehead. Ukrainian units continue local counter-raids and special forces insertions aimed at keeping corridors open and preventing complete encirclement. Second, the operational objective. From Kyiv's point of view, the priority is not to cling to ruined buildings at any cost. The immediate task is to create a safe egress for Ukrainian forces to extract hundreds of troops from an increasingly precarious cauldron with minimum loss of manpower and material. That is the logic behind intensified strikes to the north at Suvorov and Pankivka in order to force the Russians to divert resources from the Pokrovsk axis and to widen the bottleneck enough for a withdrawal. If those flank operations succeed, the corridor could be large enough for orderly withdrawals. If they fail, the risk is a far more damaging encirclement. Now, vivid human markers in recent days. Elite Ukrainian units, among them paratroopers, staged bold actions inside central Pokrovsk, briefly raising the Ukrainian flag over the city administration building. Those images are not merely propaganda theatre. They are proof that Ukrainian small unit mobility, initiative and information advantage remain significant even in the face of heavy Russian presence and pressure. Yet symbolic actions must be read against the map. They do not by themselves negate the tactical reality of Russian territorial gains. How did the front arrive at this moment? Russia has used a deliberate attritional approach, incrementally widening a salient and pressing urban infiltration tactics that are slow but costly in human lives and time. That approach has consumed large numbers of personnel and material. For Ukraine, the cost of holding Pokrovsk has been substantial. For Russia, the cost of taking it has also been enormous. Analysts note that the Russians have at times paid and continue to pay a very high price for incremental progress. The high price is why, even if Russia secures bits of urban terrain, the town may be of limited immediate value as a logistic hub. It is heavily damaged and would require repair to serve as an effective rail or supply node. At the operational level, there is a second and more revealing front, one made of electricity pylons, rail signals, dams and fuel depots. During the recent period, Ukraine has intensified strikes deep into Russian rear areas, hitting power substations and storage nodes in border regions. These strikes have tangible operational effects. They downgrade signaling on rail lines, disrupt logistics, and in some cases cause local blackouts that complicate the enemy's command and control and sustainment. Recent attacks have caused large power outages in Belgorod and Voronezh regions and damaged infrastructure relied upon by formations advancing towards Pokrovsk. Those strikes change the arithmetic of a massed assault. They do not create victory by themselves, but they can turn a concentration of troops into an exposed and brittle target. Put simply, modern offensives live and die by their supply. Tanks and infantry cannot move without fuel, rails without signaling, brigades without charged radios. Ukraine's campaign to strike the nerve centers of Russian logistics has been designed to make a massed Russian concentration, however vast, vulnerable. If rail signals fail and bridges or dams are put out of action, a massed force becomes a dispersed starving force. That is the strategic logic behind recent Ukrainian deep strikes. That said, The situation is not one-sided. Russia still fields capacity, manpower, artillery and drones, and it has adapted tactics. The Russian effort is grinding forward on multiple axes, even as it suffers high casualties. That is why the question for Ukraine's commanders is operational. Can they extract, reposition and preserve combat power, or must they trade those troops for symbolic defences? The right answer balances the need to deny Russian strategic depth with the imperative to avoid the needless encirclement of trained units. On the international plane, two practical matters matter to the front line. First, weapons and munitions. Kyiv is pressing allies for longer-range strike options and cruise missiles. Negotiations over Western systems continue. Even a small Soviet-era aphorism applies. The presence of a capability often matters more than the quantity you initially receive. Second, logistics and finance. Western aid remains decisive. Where that support narrows, Moscow hopes to gain traction. Where it increases, Kyiv gains time and maneuver. The diplomatic clock and the battlefield clock are both running. Reports indicate ongoing discussions about supplying further longer-range cruise options to Ukraine. A few practical takeaways for listeners who want to make sense of the headlines as 4. Pokrovsk is contested, not a simple binary of fallen or held. Control is patchwork. Streets, blocks and industrial zones change hands repeatedly. Ukraine's immediate objective is force preservation, to keep experienced units alive and to trade space for combat power where necessary. That explains the focus on opening corridors and hitting Russian logistics. Deep strikes on Russian territory and transport infrastructure have strategic effect. They alter logistics, morale and political calculations behind the front, but strikes also risk escalation and impose wider costs, notably to civilians. And fourth and finally, the tactical picture is not static. Intelligence, special forces raids, drone warfare and Kyiv's use of long-range precision weapons continue to shape outcomes faster than mere troop counts. The battle for Pokrovsk is simultaneously a test of urban tenacity and logistical resilience. It is also a test of judgment by commanders and by politicians supplying them. Cities can be held as symbols, but armies live off supplies. Kyiv's approach to combine local defence with targeted strikes that sever enemy logistics is designed to turn Russian mass into vulnerability. Whether it will succeed depends on 3 variables: Ukraine's ability to extract and regroup its forces, continued Allied support in munitions and systems, and the Russian capacity to repair supply lines under fire. On the ground, the human story is already written in rubble and courage. Small units fighting house to house, drones hunting columns, technicians restoring signals by torchlight. On the map, the story will be written in whether the lines of supply remain open or become broken. For now, the fight around Pokrovsk remains in doubt. That uncertainty is harsh, dangerous and decisive. I'll follow up with further information on this as and when it becomes available.